Hi, and thanks for joining us. Today we're going to learn about how to make sauerkraut. As we make sauerkraut, there's different ways that you can preserve it. Today we're going to be doing lacto-fermented sauerkraut. You can also make your sauerkraut the same way, but to keep it for longer, you're going to want to process that and can it. But that's not what we're covering today. This is lacto fermentation, which you can enjoy in as little as 7 days. When you ferment food, you make the nutrients more bioavailable to your body. What that means is the process of fermenting breaks down some of the components in the food so your body can more readily absorb the nutrients. Sauerkraut, along with other fermented foods, are very good for your digestive tract. They help support your gut health. They are natural probiotics. They reduce oxidative stress, inflammation, and they really help those that have GI and stomach and digestive issues. Of course, I'm not your doctor, so make sure that you talk to your doctor before beginning any type of health regime. But I'm pretty certain that they're going to be in full support of you adding fermented foods to your diet. Sauerkraut is crazy easy to make, and you're probably going to be kicking yourself in the rear that you haven't tried your hand at fermented foods way before watching this video. But literally all you need is cabbage and salt. Now you may need some water, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but that's all the ingredients you need. Now supplies you need, I like using the wide mouth canning jars. Any wide mouth jar you have will work. And then you're going to need a weight, because part of the fermentation process is keeping the food below the liquid line. Anything above the liquid line has an opportunity to mold, and that's definitely not something that we want. You can get these fermenting weights anywhere, or you can make your own out of Ziploc baggies and water and even some rocks in that if you wanted to. Just make sure everything's clean and sterile that comes in contact with your food. Much like with the other fermented foods, you're not going to want to use any metal. And now you can use the metal to cut the produce, but you're not going to want to use a metal glass, a metal lid, or anything metal that is going to come in contact with during that fermentation process. Glass, wood, or plastic. That's it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start cutting up our cabbage to make our sauerkraut. Now you can eat this daily. You can eat it on top of your salads. You can eat it in your sandwiches. You can add it to your Reubens. You can do it in your scrambled eggs. You can just take a bite of it daily. It's so good. It's completely up to you. And you can use different ingredients when you're making your sauerkraut. I like to add garlic, hot peppers, and even diced carrots to mine. So you can get past the basics if you want to spice things up just a little bit. The first thing that you're going to want to do, which I've already done, is you're going to want to soak your cabbage in cold water and clean it off. Make sure there's no pesticides, no bugs, and then you want to peel off the outside couple of layers. Then you want to slice it up very, very fine. You could, if you had a food processor or a mandolin, you could do that. I'm just going to use an old-fashioned. I'm going to use an old-fashioned knife. I kind of do everything old-fashioned. But you're going to slice up the whole cabbage. The first thing that I want you to do, though, is get you a little kitchen scale. And I want you to measure the weight of your bowl. This is important because you need to add a specific amount of salt per pound of cabbage that you have. And if you do it after the fact, it's going to be too late. So get you a kitchen scale, measure the weight of your bowl so you know how much the bowl weighs to begin with before you add your cabbage in there. And that's it. That's about as complicated as you get. You are going to slice up your cabbage no more than a 1/4 inch thick, or the size of a, or is it 1/16, an eighth? Real small, like the size of a quarter. You want it really thin because you want that to be able, the salt to be able to break it down and not have to work too hard at it. After you get your cabbage all sliced up the size that you want it, you're going to put it in a bowl and weigh it. And that's the stage that I'm at now after I had already sliced up a head of cabbage before I created this video. Now you want to use the fresh cabbage, and the fresh cabbage is going to have more moisture content than one that's been sitting around for several weeks. And yes, cabbage does last a really long time. But if you're growing cabbage in your garden and it does last a long time, but you're just sick of eating cabbage, this is a great way to preserve it to last for longer. But the reason why you want fresh cabbage is it's going to have a lot of that moisture content, and the whole purpose of adding the salt, one, it helps ferment it, but two, that salt draws out the moisture in your cabbage, which helps protect it from the mold and unwanted bacteria growth that you don't want, the bad kind of bacteria. So I have sliced up my cabbage here, the one that I did right before I started recording. I sliced it up, and then I had 3 pounds of cabbage, so I added 6 teaspoons of salt. It is going to be 1.5 to 2 teaspoons of salt per pound of cabbage. It's completely a preference to you. Do not use your regular iodized table salt. It has anti-caking agents in it that just give your sauerkraut a really funny, cloudy, grayish appearance. I use the pink Himalayan sea salt, and that's what I recommend you use. There are other salts that you can use. Just don't use your iodized table salt. You can use just regular sea salt, which is a really good option. But I grind it up. You don't want those thick chunks. You want it ground fine. So I took my 6 teaspoons on my 3 pounds of cabbage, and I've let it sit. Now, you can let it sit for an hour, a couple hours, but what you want to do is you want it to break that salt to start extracting those juices from the cabbage. Don't worry about it being too salty. The whole fermentation process takes care of that. So you don't have to worry. It's like, oh, that's a lot of salt. Nope. It's going to go away. The bacteria and yeast and the cabbage and everything, when it starts to ferment, it's going to get rid of all that salt, so you don't have to worry about it. Now, there is still sodium content. Don't misquote me. It's just not going to taste like you ate a teaspoon of salt in your sauerkraut. After you've added the salt, and I'm probably skipping steps, but you'll get the gist of it, you're going to want to toss it around and incorporate that for a really good couple of minutes with your hands or a spoon or something. And then just cover it and let it sit for a couple hours. If you have room in your fridge, you can let it sit overnight. But you're going to want to let it sit and extract all of those juices. If, for whatever reason, your cabbage just doesn't want to produce enough juice, I'm going to talk to you about how to make a salt brine. Now, you can make the same salt brine when you're lacto-fermenting other vegetables, that we've talked about this week during the fermentation course. And this is the same type of brine that you can use for those. All you're going to need is a teaspoon of your sea salt, ground fine, into 1 cup of water. You're not going to want to boil it hard. You just want to get it warm enough to have the salt dissolve. And the reason why you make a salt brine is because you have to have enough liquid to cover your cabbage in your jar. Otherwise, it'll mold. So that's very important. I made mine just in case. I might have enough liquid in my bowl of cabbage. I don't know yet until I put it in the jar, and that's what we're going to do now. After you've got your cabbage all diced and it's been soaking into the salt for a while and it's starting to break down, and you can see it breaking down, you want to give it a good stir. And now we're going to start adding it to our mason jar. We're going to pack that joker in good, but you want to leave about 1 inch head space at the top. That means stop adding your stuff where the rim, right below the rim here, because you need your weight to sit on it. And again, you want that thing covered in liquid. I'm sorry, I can't do 2 things at once. So I'm just going to keep on packing this. Now, I have one of these. If you don't have one, that's okay. You don't need no special tools to do this. But this helps me pack that down in here really good. Do you see that? It was full, and I started packing it, and it just compressed that future sauerkraut. Press it down, and you can see the liquid start to form up at the top when you're doing that. It's a muddler, pounder. I don't know. I don't know the proper term for this. All I know is I like it. You know, I crush when I'm making nuts and stuff and I can't find my mortar and pestle. I'll just pound it on down. And I'll keep doing that until this is full. Now you're going to want, oxygen is your enemy when it comes to fermenting your food. You're not going to want to let a lot of oxygen in there. So you're wanting a tight lid. But you remember, as it off gases and as that bacteria and yeast do its thing, it's going to expand a little bit. So you're going to want to pop that little top just a little bit and let it, you know, every once in a while. Okay, so I've kept adding more of my cabbage, and I'm almost full. I'm going to get a little bit more to the top. So when you're adding the salt to your cabbage or other vegetables, it's going to create a brine with its own juices. And that brine, as it breaks down, that good bacteria that's on all vegetables is going to break down the sugars that are in your vegetables. All vegetables have some type of sugar. And that process is going to create the lactic acid. The lactic acid is what helps preserve it. And it also what helps provide the nutrients in that fermented food that we talk about it making it bioavailable. Meaning that your body can process those nutrients better because they're bioavailable to you by eating fermented foods. Promotes good gut health, promotes good immune system health. It tastes good. Now, as you're doing this, you're going to see bubbles. Bubbles are part of the fermentation process. That's a good sign. Mold is not a good sign. Again, you're going to want to make sure that all of this stays under the liquid. That's very important, that it stays submerged in liquid. And that helps prevent any type of mold or bacteria growth. Now, this will take about a week. You taste it, you like it, that's great. Put it in the fridge. You want it stronger, go ahead and let it ferment another week. It's not going to hurt it at all. Now I've let this get about as full as I want it. I'm going to take, there's enough in here for me to do another jar, just so y'all know. And if you had one of those sauerkraut crocks, great. I've been wanting for a long time. It's on my Christmas list. Anybody want to send me an extra one for Christmas? My birthday's coming up. That'd be good too. Okay, so I didn't have, which I didn't think I was going to. This cabbage was a little bit older than I wanted it to be. I didn't have enough of the brine to cover or submerge my cabbage in the liquid. So I'm going to, the salt brine that I already made and prepped ahead of time, I melted, well, I didn't melt. I warmed up my brine until the sea salt was completely, Himalayan pink salt, was completely dissolved. So I poured in just a little bit. I didn't need much, if you saw that. I'm going to tap it down again. Now I'm going to put my clean glass weight on the top. Make sure everything's nice and submerged. Oops, I got a little joker hanging out over here. Now this is why you want that wide mouth jar too. Because if here's a little thick piece of cabbage. If this wasn't a wide mouth jar, that weight wouldn't fit in there. Now I got these cute little fermentation lids that you use on mason jars, but you can just use a regular plastic cap on yours if you want to. I'm going to put this on here nice and tight. I'm going to leave this in a cool, dark place for a week. I'm just going to check up on it, make sure everything's still under liquid. That's it. 1 week, 2 weeks, you're going to have your own sauerkraut. Now, once you start eating it, keep it in the fridge. Don't keep it on the counter after you start taking out of it. But if you want to preserve it longer, then you're going to want to can it. And that's a whole nother workshop that we have available for you. But folks, that's all there is to it. And you can apply the same technique to every other type of vegetable that you want to ferment or do lacto-fermentation. And even like, for instance, if you want to do carrots or beets or green beans, asparagus, same process. Just you can look up the salt equations for that. So our salt equations for our sauerkraut was 1.5 to 2 teaspoons of salt per 1 pound of cabbage. Slice it up, let it sit, toss it with the salt, let those juices extract, put it in your jar, cover it with liquid, put a weight on it, seal it, let it sit 1 to 2 weeks. That's it. You're done. See? Easy.